on chapter 7. This should just be a very quick discussion. We'll look into the foundations of spectrophotometry or spectroscopy as a whole. No? Okay? So, tignan lang natin yung underlying concepts and then yun na yun. Okay? So, okay, just give you a short history and the concept behind different types of spectroscopy. Okay? So, with that, let's begin. So, this will be a very quick ano na lang discussion. Puro terms lang siya, to be honest. Walang calculation. Okay? So, yan. Okay? So, for our discussion today, we'll take a look into the electromagnetic radiation. What is it, and how matter plays a role in the EMR spectrum. And we'll look into different types of spectra, such as emission, absorption, fluorescence, phosphorescence, and the possible applications of this topic in different research fields. No? So, again, mabilis lang yung lesson natin. Unti lang ito eh. So, punta tayo sa electromagnetic radiation. No? So, probably you've seen this in high school. No? Ako, first time na nakita ko to high school. No? Sa first year high school namin. Wherein we see here the relationship of wavelength, frequency, and the corresponding type of radiation. No? So dito makikita natin that on the left side we have very small wavelengths, and on the right side we have huge wavelengths. No? So some of the wavelengths are even in kilometer distances pa nga. No? Okay? So yan. So and also depending on the wavelength, no, iba-iba din yung frequency. No? What can you notice? Look at the numbers for the wavelength and the frequency. No? Okay? So dito, if you have a very small wavelength, okay, if you have a very small wavelength, the frequency is very high. No? Sorry. The frequency is very high. While if you have a very huge wavelength, okay, when you say huge wavelength, no, parang ito encompasses different, ito encompasses kilometer distance. No? The frequency now is very low. Okay? So ano masasabi natin about these two? So masasabi natin is that yung ating wavelength and frequency, they appear to be inversely proportional. No? Okay? So the higher the wavelength, the shorter the frequency. No? Okay? And of course, the opposite will be true as well. No? So the shorter the wavelength, the higher the frequency. Okay? Siguro let's define frequency muna. No? Okay? So para may idea kayo, ano ba uli yung wavelength na yan and yung frequency. So when you say wavelength, no, this is the distance traveled by a cycle, no, of an oscillation of energy. No? So ito yung distance traveled by the oscillation of energy. When I say oscillation of energy, we represent it as waves like this. No? Literal na waves of energy. Okay? Okay, when it does one cycle, so meaning nun dito sa baba na to and then sa next na baba, so that is one wavelength. No? So that's one wavelength. Okay, pwede rin naman yung wavelength i-measure dito sa taas. No? So yan, so ito ay puro one wavelength. Okay, yan. Okay, so it depends on where you measure it. No? Pwede sa sa kanyang peak or sa trough. Peak is yung nasa taas, trough yung nasa baba. Okay? So the distance between that, no, is called a wavelength. No? Okay? Some of the wavelengths are very small, even reaching atomic size pa nga. And other wavelengths are very huge. No? As I said kanina, kilometers yung distance nila. Okay? So yun yung wavelength, no? So that's the distance between the consecutive oscillation of energy. Okay? So when I say oscillation of energy, ito yon, yung wave na yan. And the distance between the two peaks or the two troughs, that's the wavelength. Okay? Now, let's talk about frequency naman. When you say frequency, that is the number of oscillations in 1 second. No? So let's say this is a time scale and this corresponds to 1 second. No? Yan. Okay. So let's say this is our time in seconds sa baba. And here I have two different waves, no? So I have waves na ganito and I have waves na ganito. Okay? So yan. So dito makikita natin yung relationship talaga between wavelength and frequency, no? Okay? In a given time span, no? So here, as you can see, the distance between the waves is very small. Okay? Kumbaga mababa yung kanyang wavelength. But when it comes to the frequency, the number of cycles in a second, super dami, no? So, ang dami niyang oscillation in a second, no? Okay? Yan. Okay? So, yan. While dito naman sa baba, ang lalaki ng kanyang wavelength, no? So, for example, the wavelength is here to there, no? Mas mahaba yung kanyang wavelength. But, in terms of the frequency, the number of cycle per second, masyadong mababa, no? Yan. Okay. So dito natin makita yung inverse relationship talaga nila ng dalawa, no? So the wavelength again is the distance between two waves, the two consecutive peaks and troughs of the wave. When we say frequency, this is the number of oscillation per second, no, of the energy. Okay? So now, so itong wavelength and frequency na to, pwede natin to i-relate in terms of the energy of the particles, no? So the idea kasi is that the higher the frequency means mas maraming energy. Okay? And the lower the frequency, mas mababa yung energy. Okay? So you can imagine it as parang tao, no? Pag masyadong magalaw, pag masyadong frequent yung kanyang movement, marami siyang energy, no? Just like children, no? Pag yung bata galaw ng galaw, masyadong mataas energy. Pero as you grow older, medyo nawawala na yung energy. So hindi na tayo masyado gumagalaw na. So yan. So the higher the frequency, the higher the energy. And then the lower the frequency, the lower the energy. Okay? So with these three concepts in mind, we can identify the type of radiation, okay, into two. We have here the non-ionizable or non-ionizing radiation and the ionizing radiation. Siguro you've heard this, no? So we have the non-ionizing region and the ionizing region. Okay? So, ano meron sa ionized, no? Okay? Kasi some frequencies, no, some wavelengths, no, of certain frequency are very energetic enough, no, to the point that they can actually remove electron from the atom, no? Kumbaga super lakas ng kanyang energy to the point that it can remove the electron of an atom. When it is capable of removing electron of an atom, then it is ionizing. Okay? And under ionizing radiation, we have three types of radiation: the gamma ray, X-ray, and the ultraviolet. No? So, you know, ultraviolet was a concern, no? Kasi it is a concern pa rin pala, no? When you are exposed under the sun for a prolonged period of time, no? So yung sun natin, it emits three different types of UV rays UVA, BC, no? Nakalimutan ko yung difference between them. But the key idea lang is that the longer time you are exposed on the sun, yan, mas malaki chances mo to develop skin cancer, no? Okay? And this concern was very popular, especially noong time na yung ozone layer natin is butas pa. Currently, it's sealing, pero dati, butas yung ozone layer. So the ozone layer kind of serve as a filter for the UV radiation, which is nasira dati because of the use of the chlorofluorocarbon. So nakakapasok yung UV rays masyado from the sun. So yun, naging prevalent yung skin cancer before. But now, we healed the ozone layer. It is still healing, but at least continuous yung healing niya. So naging less concern itong ultraviolet radiation. Kumbaga, meron na rin kasing mga sunblock na that helps us, okay, not to be affected by UV rays that much. Okay, so yun yung ultraviolet radiation. It's ionizing, and usually when we say ionizing, they can cause electrons to be removed, ionized, and ang common consequence nun will be cancer. Okay, so cancer. So the next in line will be the X-ray. Okay, if you make your wavelength much smaller and the energy much higher, you will have X-ray, and you know kung saan ginagamit yung X-ray. It's commonly used to detect bone densities. No, it allows us to see what's inside our body. Okay, it was first discovered by Roentgen, okay. So, and Becquerel, ayan. So, Becquerel, Roentgen, so sila yung mga nakadiscover ng X-ray. Yan, ginagamit siya in bioimaging. And you know that at least once a year lang ikaw dapat ma-X-ray, no? Kasi if you get exposed too much by high doses of X-ray, pwede ka rin magkasakit, na. Kumbaga, tawag doon is radiation sickness. No? Pero, yan, di ba, fraction of a second lang naman when we are exposed to X-ray. That's why we don't feel anything. No? But if you get exposed multiple times, then you will have radiation sickness. No? Pwede ka magkasakit. And then eventually, if that is too much, ayun, pwede ka magka-cancer. And the highest energy among all the versions of ionizing radiation will be the gamma rays. Now, the gamma rays has a very small wavelength. Okay, sabi ko nga, to the point na atomic size na siya. Ito yon, yung atomic size na yung kanyang wavelength. Okay, yan. So gamma rays are very small and very powerful. No? So gamma rays can quickly remove the electron of an atom. So meaning if you get exposed to this, pwede ka talaga magkaroon ng cancer. No? So it's inevitable. No? Mangyayari talaga yan when you get exposed to this. No? Okay. So ako, to be honest with you, my OJT kasi is PNRI, so Philippine Nuclear Research Institute. And I was able to see gamma ray source, no, with my own eyes. Kita ko talaga, no, it's glowing blue, no. Nakikita mo yung parang mga nasa sci-fi. It's really blue, no. May ilaw siya na blue. Pero because it's submerged in a water solution, no. So hindi naman ako natatama ng gamma rays outside, no. Pero nakikita mo yung mga particles, no, na naggo-glow, okay? Because of the energy emitted by the radioactive source. No? So, yun. Nakakita na ako ng itsura ng gamma rays in general. So, nag-glow talaga sila. Okay? So, legit yan. Pero, since it is under the water, so, hindi naman ako natamaan yan. So, still safe ako. Okay? So, yan. And gamma rays are always accompanied in nuclear reactions. So for example, yung uranium, yung cobalt, when they undergo nuclear decay, they emit gamma rays talaga, no? Okay. And that is used in energy production then, no? Such as in nuclear power plants, no? Okay. Pero yun na nga, no? So gamma rays pose danger, no? Especially when uh, you are unprotected, no, from it, no? Okay. So yan. So in general, we have three types of ionizing radiation. They are all characterized by small wavelength and high frequency. Okay. So we have ultraviolet, X-ray, and gamma ray. So gamma ray is the strongest of all, and the ultraviolet is the weakest of the ionizing radiation. Okay. So yun. So all of them can cause cancer. So kailangan hindi ka masyado exposed to it. So bakit dito ako nag-umpisa sa idea ng ionizing, no? Bakit hindi ako nag-start dito sa kabilang side? Well, I encountered a lot of fake news on Facebook. Siyempre, yun naman yung pugad ng fake news. Alam niyo yan. I encountered fake news about 5G causing cancer daw na. Gamit ako incognito kasi masisira yung aking name. So, 5G cancer. So, siguro familiar kayo dito, no? Ito sinasabi nila. So, 5G can cause cancer daw. And it's really prevalent, no? In United States where 5G is being rolled out, no? So, yan. So, do you think they can cause cancer at all? No? So, are they even in the ionizing spectrum? No, no? Kasi yung mga cellphone natin, they can only give off non-ionizing radiation, more specifically radio waves and some form of infrared waves. No? So yung cellphone natin, it communicates with radio waves, and then yung heat na nafe-feel natin from our cellphone, it's infrared. No? Okay, yan yung mainit, yung infrared. Radio waves yan yung nagko-contact sa tower. And 5G is here. Okay? 5G technology. Andito siya sa radio waves na. So, as you can see, this spectrum has a very low energy, no? Okay? So, how come that it can cause cancer? Okay? So, hindi ito totoo, no? So, whenever you see something like this, no, claiming that cell phones can cause cancer, cell phone can alter the functions of your brain, well, wala naman talaga. No? Okay, so that's all fake, no? Because remember that our cellular devices aren't that powerful enough to produce ionizing radiation, no? Siguro kasi kung may ionizing radiation yan, lobat agad yan, no? Ilan seconds pa lang. Because in order for you to produce ionizing radiation, you have to have a very high energy input, no? So, alam, marami kang energy para ma-produce to. But our cell phone batteries, mahina lang yan. So, it can only produce non-ionizing radiation. Okay? So, nirelate ko lang siya sa fake news na nakikita ko sa net. So, sa Philippines, may mga naniniwala doon. That's a very unfortunate event, no, na may naniniwala doon. But yeah, cell phones doesn't cause cancer because they don't have the energy, no, to ionize our atoms, no. Therefore, there will be no chemical reactions, no, na mangyayari. Okay. So now, punta na tayo sa non-ionizing. So in the non-ionizing spectrum, ito medyo malaki talaga to kasi low energy sila. Malaki yung versions natin such as radio waves, microwave, infrared, and visible, no? Including the visible light, no? Okay? So, radio waves, these are used in telecommunications, okay? such as in our TVs, cell phones, radio. Ayan, so radio waves gamit natin doon. Okay? And alam niyo ba kung gaano kalaki yung mga wavelength nito? So, kilometers yung distance, no? Okay? So, yan. If you compute yun sa DZBB, yung 594 kilohertz nila, okay? When you convert it into the wavelength, no? It's actually 500 meters, no? Yung wavelength, no? So, yung wavelength na yun, mula dito sa bahay namin hanggang saan kaya? Doon sa gasoline station, banda sa labas. So, ganun kalaki yung kanyang wavelength. No? So, mas malaki pa yun sa tao. So, how come it can cause your atoms to be excited? No? So, mas malaki pa sa tao yung wavelength. No? So, yun. Walang effect yan sa humans. No? Okay? So, yun. So, you have the wavelengths, the radio waves at the part na masyadong malaking wavelength. So it's mostly used in telecommunication. Okay. And then here we have microwave. Okay. So microwaves, hulaan nyo saan siya ginagamit sa microwave oven. Okay. And sometimes in radars as well. Okay. So siguro nag-iisip na kayo na, sir, paano po yung microwave nakapag-inat ng mga bagay na? Yeah, nakakainit siya ng mga bagay, but still, it's non-ionizing na. Okay? Later, I'll emphasize on how come yung microwave napapainit yung matter na. So, later pa yan. Pero for now, alam nyo na starting microwave, medyo mainit na yung mga bagay na. Ayan. Okay? So, and then, down here, we have infrared. Okay? So the wavelength here is much smaller than in the microwave. No? And yung infrared, it's used in heating devices. No? Okay, so I think meron mga heaters sa ibang bansa na gumagamit ng infrared rays. No? Sometimes it's also used in telecommunication. I don't know if naabutan nyo yung pasahan is through infrared. Naabutan ko yan. Okay. So, sa Nokia dati, for you to transfer photos, gamit ka ng infrared. Okay. Ito yung pag-transfer niyan. Ayan. Na-try ko to na. So, you can transfer the data between two cell phone using infrared. So, there is this portion in the cell phone that emits infrared light na. Ayan. Ayan. So, kailangan magkatabi nga lang sila. So, it's very awkward. Unlike now na kahit malayo kayo, okay lang. But dati ganyan, magpasa ng pictures sa cellphone. Okay? So, it uses infrared technology. Remote controls also use infrared technology. And of course, our smartphones are powered by infrared technology then. No? So for example, in Face ID sa iOS, di ba titignan mo lang and then suddenly it's unlocked, no? Our eyes cannot see the infrared rays, but my webcam can visualize infrared waves na. So, pakita ko sa inyo. Di ba nakikita nyo yung blink-blink na yan? So that's actually infrared light emitted by the infrared camera of the cell phone. So yan. So tumatama yung infrared light sa akin and it maps the shape of my face so that it can recognize na it is me. So yan. So sa mga remote may mga infrared. For example, so this is my remote sa LED light ko. Ayan na. Nakikita mo may ilaw. I cannot see it personally but using camera we can see infrared light. Okay? Ayan. Okay. So, yan. So, yan. So, that's infrared, no? Webcams, any camera can see it, no? But still, our eyes cannot, no? Okay? So, yan. And then the next one is the visible spectrum. Okay? So, we're familiar with the visible spectrum. These are the spectrum of light that can be perceived by our eyes, no, through the rods and the cones, no. So this particular region have enough energy to excite the cones of our eyes, no, so that it can be translated into RGB colors, no. So yun. So kapag nakita natin yung object, na-excite niya yung certain portions sa cones natin, no? And that registers in our brain as these colors, no? So we have the Roy G. Biv color here, no? Okay. So itong red color, as you can see, it has a very high wavelength, no? So it has around 700 nanometer wavelength. And then the violet ones have around 400 nanometer, no? Okay. So anything greater than 700 nanometer is IR, okay, infrared. And anything anything smaller than 400 nanometer is UV na, ultraviolet na. Okay? So yan. So yung mga nakikita natin na colors sa paligid, so they are just a small portion of a very wide spectrum, no? Okay. So ito lang yung nakikita natin, but look at the range of the spectrum. It's so big na. Okay. So meron talaga tayong mga nakikita na may mga bagay tayong hindi nakikita na nag-exist talaga. No? So malay mo, yung mga ghost na sa radio wave. Okay. Wala na sa infrared sila. Kaya nga si pangalan nun, yung nakaganon sa KMJS, di ba? May gumaganon-ganon siyang device. Malay mo may infrared spectrum doon. I don't know. Di ba? But yun. So yun. Yun yung idea na. So we just see a very small portion of the entire spectrum. Okay? So yun lang. So that's the story about the EMR. Mamaya punta tayo sa mga key person na. Okay? And how it is related to spectroscopy. Okay? But for now, we know that this is the EMR. We can see the relationship between the wavelength, frequency, and the energy. The higher the frequency means you have smaller wavelength and higher energy. The smaller your frequency, you have a higher wavelength and a smaller energy as well. Okay? Some of the spectrum, okay, are ionizing, but majority are not ionizing. Okay, when you say ionizing, they can induce removal of electron in an atom or in a molecule, and that causes a chemical reaction which can lead to cancer. Okay, especially kunwari sa DNA tumama yan, no? Natanggal yung electron sa DNA natin, so pwede masira DNA mo. Okay. So yan. So it is cancerous. So yung mga ionizing lang yan. But the others that are in the non-ionizing region, they are safe naman. Okay? For example, in our cell phones, we use radio waves, microwaves naman kapag sa microwave oven. Ayan. So infrared. So ito, ginagamit to sa cellphone natin. Remote control. Yung mga lumang Nokia, ayan, nabutan ko yun. And then the visible, okay? So just remember that the red can be perceived by our eyes starting at 700 nanometer. And as you go down to 400 nanometer, the color changes to violet, okay? So yan. So marami pa nasa paligid natin na hindi natin nakikita. So, malay mo, nandito yung mga multo. Dito, radio waves pala sila. Okay? So, yan. Now, let's look into the persons, no, that theorize on the concept of EMR, no? And later on, tignan natin how it is related to chemical quantification, no? Okay? Well, the idea of light being waves, no? So yung idea of light as waves. Okay? So yung idea ng light as waves, no, it dates back to Newton's time. Okay, so around 1600s na. Okay, so si Newton, 1600 ba? Basta old times na. So si Newton, alam niya na yung light natin, it is a wave, no, and pwede mo ma-identify yung colors, no, depending on the waves of light, no. So siya ngayon gumamit ng prism, di ba? Okay, and then the mathematical approach of light as waves was proposed by James Maxwell. Okay, so according to James Maxwell, yung ating light, it is specifically composed of two oscillations in the electric and in the magnetic field, no. So both sila nag-oscillate, okay, and therefore as the energy oscillates in the spectrum, we can perceive it as different colors, no, okay, for visible light, no. Okay, so yun. So yun yung idea ni James Maxwell, no, that the light is just an oscillation in both electric and magnetic field, no. Okay, so yun. Ito si Isaac Newton, so sabi ko nga around 1600s pa to. Alam niya that the light can be separated into different colors, and those colors correspond to certain frequency of light na. Okay, so kumbaga may idea na siya before. But the one who theorized it using mathematics was James Maxwell. Okay, around 1873. Okay, so sila yung dalawa sa light as waves, na. Okay, and ito nga yung characteristic ng ating wave. It should be on the earlier slide pala. Okay, as I mentioned, the smaller the wavelength, the higher the frequency becomes, and vice versa. Okay, the equation that relates frequency and the wavelength is this one. So it's lambda times nu equals c. Okay, wherein lambda is the wavelength and the nu is the frequency. We can sometimes call it v, but we call it nu, no? So it's a Greek letter. Okay, and with the product of the two is called the speed of light, no? Okay, so you know the speed of light is 3 times 10 raised to 8 meters per second. So it's a universal constant, no? Okay, so yan. So basically, as the wavelength goes up, the frequency goes down and vice versa. Okay? So now, tapos na tayo sa light as waves, no? So dalawa lang proponent nan, si Newton and si Maxwell. But how come it is related to matter, no? Paano natin relate yung colors as something related to elements, no? So papasok na tayo sa quantum theory. So dito nga yung sinasabi ko na nagtalo si Einstein and the quantum physicists, no, such as Niels Bohr, Schrödinger, no. So yan. So dito sila nagtalo sa concept ng quantum theory. Okay? But before we go to their debate, no, puntahan natin muna si Max Planck, no. So according to Max Planck, no, the energy are in packets of para siyang packets, no, that behave as a matter, no. So kumbaga para siyang it's a packet, no, that can hit matter, no. So yan yung ating light, no. So it's packets, no. Okay, or we can say it is quantized, no. So meaning pag quantize, naka-portion siya, no? Portion by portion yung energy na yan. Okay? So this is light as matter. Okay? So yan. So according to Max Planck, the energy of our light comes in discrete quantities. Okay? So meaning it's in packets, and the energy of that packet of light can be computed by this equation, delta E equals h nu, wherein h is the Planck's constant and then the nu is the frequency, no? Okay, Don't worry, walang calculations dito na. Kaya sinasabi ko lang yung mga equation. Okay? So yan. So si Max Planck una nag-theorize niyan that that light acts as matter. Okay? And then it can be quantized using this equation. So the energy of the packet of light is the product of the frequency and the Planck's constant. Okay? And then dito naman si Einstein, he was able to prove that light is in packets. No? So naka-packets sila, and that packet is called the photons. No? Okay? So light as photons. No? So dito, si Einstein na-discover niya in 1905. No? So he published 5 papers, no, during his Annus Mirabilis, no, or in English it's Year of Miracle, kasi ang dami niya na-publish na paper, and all of them are very revolutionary. Okay, one of those papers stated the dual nature of light, no, sa kanyang Annus Mirabilis, no. So yan, so napansin ni Einstein that yung light natin, it can cause the electrons to be ejected, no, from an atom, and that's called the photoelectric effect. No? So sabi niya, when, so sabi niya, when our light hits matter, okay, some frequencies can eject electron while some do not eject electron. Okay? Okay. So ibig sabihin nun, light can interact with matter. Okay? So yun. Ayun, yun lang naman yung sabi niya. Okay? And then papasok dyan si Niels Bohr, which stated the opposite din naman. No? So according to Niels Bohr naman, that matter can behave as light. No? Kay Einstein kasi, yung light, it can behave as matter. Kay Niels Bohr, yung matter, it can behave as light. So doon sila nagtalo. Okay. So nagtalo sila in 1927, and ang ending si Niels Bohr yung nanalo. Okay? Because there is something that Einstein cannot describe, no? For example, when you hit an object, 'di ba, it glows. Alam niyo naman 'yan, no? Nag-glow yung lutuan natin sa bahay when it's being heated up, no? It glows red. So, hindi ma-explain yun ni Einstein, no? Kasi ang alam niya lang that light can act as a matter, but not the other way around. He doesn't believe yung kabaliktaran, no? Niels Bohr theorized na pwede yung baliktad, no? Okay? That yung matter, pwede siya mag-behave as light. Okay? The only thing that matter needs to do is to oscillate, no? Okay? So yun, sabi ni Niels Bohr, kapag nag-glow daw yung matter natin, nag-oscillate siya, so nagba-vibrate din siya, and then the vibration of our matter results in the emission of light. Okay? So dun sila nagtalo, yung sinasabi ko. Apparently it's not included in the slides, but it's just a side idea lang naman. Okay? So yan, so eventually Niels Bohr won kasi ginawa niya, in order to prove his idea, gumawa siya ng panibagong field of science. No. So ano yung laban mo doon, 'di ba? Gumawa siya ng panibagong field of science. So talo talaga si Einstein sa ganung field na. Okay? But anyway, this idea by Einstein, the photoelectric effect, is still very important in the foundation of the quantum theory of matter. No. Spearheaded by Niels Bohr. Okay? Sabi nila doon that yung matter, it can behave as energy or light na. Okay? So pwede siya mag-oscillate, and therefore it can release colors. Okay? So yun lang naman. Okay? So that's a short history of yung mga tao na kilala in the field of electromagnetic radiation. So we have Maxwell, who stated that light is the oscillation of electric and magnetic field. Isaac Newton, which stated that light can be split into a spectrum of colors. That's why we have this term called spectra. And then we have Max Planck, who theorized that light can behave as matter, okay? And the energy can be calculated using this equation. And then we have Einstein, who gave us a valid proof that light can really behave as matter, okay? And then eventually Niels Bohr and his peers, no? Niels Bohr, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, sila naman, they theorized that matter can behave as light, no? Okay, which is something that Einstein did not agree, okay? But this is true, but totoo yan, okay? So yan. So yan, so that's a short history of light and matter, okay? So now we accept the idea of Einstein that light can behave as a wave and a particle, no? So it can interact with matter and it can interact with the energy, no? Okay, and interchangeable yan, dalawa, okay? So yan, due to the photoelectric effect. And this idea is used now in spectroscopy, no? So spectroscopy, in spectroscopy, we study here the interaction of the light and the matter. And again, it is possible because of the dual nature of light, according to Einstein, okay? So yan. So we can study matter and the light, no? Okay. So and then spectrometry. Sorry, medyo na bubulol ako kasi I'm stuffed dito. Okay. So in the spectrometry naman, so this is the measurement of the energy, okay? Or the measurement of light, no, to obtain information about matter, okay? So in spectroscopy and spectrometry, kapag may metry, ibig sabihin may measurement of light, okay? That describes the matter, okay? And there are different types of spectroscopy and spectrometry, okay? First one is the emission spectroscopy. So what happens in an emission spectroscopy is that, let's say you have your matter here, you will introduce energy into it, no? So that it will emit light, okay? So for example, yung ating flame test, okay? So siguro familiar kayo with the flame test. Okay. So yung ating matter, when you heat it up, no, when you introduce energy to it, it produces different colors, no? So iba-iba yung colors nila. And that colors can be attributed to certain elements only. Okay? Ito yung ginamit ni Niels Bohr, na that yung ating matter pwede siyang mag-release ng light. Okay? So emission spectroscopy yan, no? Iinitin mo yung matter mo so that it will glow. Okay? So saan to ginagamit yung emission spectroscopy? It is used to identify the elements in celestial object, as I mentioned to you in chapter 1. Okay? So yung mga celestial bodies natin, such as the sun, it has its emission spectra. Okay? So the elements in the sun releases different wavelengths, na? Ayan. And those wavelengths corresponds to certain elements, no? Such as sodium, hydrogen, calcium, mercury. Okay? So yan. So lahat ng yan nakikita yan dito sa emission wavelength ng sun natin. Okay? So yan yung isa sa mga usage niyan. Okay? Emission spectroscopy. Iinitin mo yung matter mo until it releases light. Okay? So yan. So another example of this is the chemiluminescence, and alam nyo to kasi ito yung ginagamit sa mga glow stick, no? So yung glow stick naman, you don't heat the chemicals, no? Instead, magkakaroon sila ng reaction, and the reaction between them causes them to release light, okay? So kumbaga yung energy ng chemical reaction, yun yung nagre-release ng light energy naman sa ating glow sticks, okay? 'Di ba kasi binabasag mo 'yan, 'di ba? Kina-crack mo siya, then mag-glow siya. So yung pag nag-crack mo 'yon, nare-release yung dalawang chemicals na may chemical reaction. So mag-glow sila. Okay? So yun yung emission spectroscopy, okay? So So may mangyayari sa matter so that it can release light. You can either heat it or you can do chemical reactions. Okay? But chemical reactions, we call that chemiluminescence. We also have this thing called bioluminescence. So siguro mas familiar kayo dito. Okay? Some aquatic species, no? Not only aquatic species, no, but even on land, no, they release light, no. For example, yung alitap-tap. Okay. So the chemical reactions inside their body allows them to release light signals, no. And yung light signals, depende yan, di ba, sa purpose niya sa paligid niya. Okay. So it can be used for mating, okay. Kunwari, papabibo siya ng papaganda, ayan. So it can be used for mating or sometimes to signal off lang sa mga co-animals niya, something like that. Okay. So anyway, mas alam niyo yung idea na to. Okay. So yun. So it's just like a chemiluminescence, but this time inside a living organism, no? So some aquatic and land species can do that, no? For example, alitap-tap, okay? So yun yung emission spectroscopy. So there will be introduction of energy either through heating or chemical reaction, and then when the energy is provided to your matter, it glows, no? It emits light. Next one is absorption spectroscopy. So in the absorption spectroscopy naman, ito yung gagawin nyo sa laboratory. Okay. But in absorption spectroscopy, dito naman, yung ating matter, instead of emitting light, it will absorb the light. No? So ina-absorb niya yung liwanag. No? Okay. So for example, I have here, let's say, 200 units of light. As the light passes through the sample, oonti na lang siya. Kunwari, 90 units. Okay? So, yan. So, kumbaga, our matter absorbs the energy given by the light. No? Okay? So, ina-absorb niya lang. No? Okay? So, yan. So, that's absorption spectroscopy. And the absorption of light of our matter, no? Depends on its chemical structure, no? So for example, yung ating mga halaman, no? So depending on the composition sa kanya, sa loob ng cell niya. So sometimes plants are green, yung iba naman violet, no? 'Di ba iba-iba yung pigment, sometimes it's yellow. Okay? So kumbaga, they absorb different amounts of light, no? Okay, depending on the type of chemical bonds they have inside them. Okay, so kapag maraming double bonds, so most likely they will absorb green. Okay, pero kapag medyo onti yung double bonds, baka they absorb red colors. So yun. So ganun yung idea why some plants differ in colors na. So iba-iba yung kanilang chemical components na that results to absorption of different wavelengths na. Okay? So yan. We can also use this in photoluminescence spectroscopy, wherein we will introduce a certain wavelength and then it will release a small radiation. Okay? So alam nyo naman siguro yung photoluminescence, meron tayo nito nung bata tayo. Kinakabit to sa ceiling. Okay, diba you have this glowing in the dark materials. So when you put it in the ceiling, it gets it absorbs the energy of the sun, no? Of sunlight, and then at night it releases it, no? In the form of radiation. Okay, so yan, it's just a form of absorption spectroscopy pa rin. Okay, so yan. And apparently, absorption spectra has lots of application. Okay, one of it is the UV-Vis application. Okay, so sa UV-Vis, ginagamit natin to quantify the amounts of matter in our substance. Okay, more of it will be discussed in the lab. Okay, but the idea is that yung matter na ina-analyze natin in the UV-Vis, they absorb certain regions of the light spectra. No? So ina-absorb nila. Okay, and the absorption can often tell us how much matter do we have in the sample. Okay. Another application of absorption spectra will be on the molecular absorption. Ito yung tinatawag natin na infrared spectroscopy. Okay. Yung kanina, UV-Vis naman. Okay, UV-Vis spectroscopy. So, i-absorb ng matter natin yung light so we can quantify them. No? When I say quantify, you can identify the concentrations. Okay. In molecular absorption naman, it is used in IR spectroscopy, wherein you will introduce infrared light to your matter, and that infrared light can cause your matter to vibrate. No? So, there will be energy transition, aka vibrations. No? And the vibration of our matter depends on the chemical bonds as well. Okay? So, yan. Okay? So, yan. So, yung infrared absorption, it just causes vibration. But when we have UVBs, mas energetic sila because they involve light, visible light. Na. Okay? For emission spectra, this is the line spectra developed by Niels Bohr. No? Okay, so it just mentions here that depending on the atom that you have, it will emit different wavelengths. No? And that wavelength is unique to each element. Okay. You can also have band spectra. For example, this is ano nga ba to? This is Raman spectroscopy. Okay. So sometimes our matter, no, kapag ininit mo siya, it can produce different wavelengths as well. Okay. And those wavelengths can correspond to different elements. No? Okay. We also have continuous spectra. Okay. So kapag continuous spectra naman, meaning our light source can produce different colors. Okay. For example, we have here xenon arc. No? So this is our light source. It can produce a continuous spectrum of light, meaning hindi siya iisang wavelength lang, kundi marami siyang wavelength na nire-release. Okay? Okay. Kumbaga parang binabanggit ko na lang yung terms na. Okay. Anyway, I'll give you the summary later. Okay. And then the last type of spectroscopy is the fluorescence naman. Okay. So fluorescence is very similar with emission. Okay. So it's very similar with emission. So kumbaga, sometimes they are interchangeable. Okay. So yan. So in fluorescence spectroscopy, your matter will absorb light and then it will release it later. Okay. So in molecular fluorescence, ganun din. No? So the molecule naman yung nag-absorb ng light and later on it's being emitted. No? Okay. So, yeah. So just like in the chemiluminescence, we have the fluorescence wherein chemical reactions emit light. No? So kumbaga parang parehas lang yung idea nila at this part. So yun lang. No? So let's summarize the types of spectra again. No? Okay. Kasi parang paulit-ulit lang siya. No? So, tatlo yung main types of spectroscopy. We have emission, absorption, and the fluorescence. Fluorescence and emission are almost the same, wherein they absorb light and then they release it. No? So, mag-absorb sila ng light, tas i-release nila. And yung pag-release ng light, it is in distinct wavelengths. No? So, that's why we can identify what elements release the light. No? Kasi distinct yun for each of the elements in the periodic table. Okay? So, for emission and fluorescence, almost same sila. But when it comes to absorption, dito naman, your matter will absorb the light, no? Okay? So, it will absorb the light, no? Kasi may mga chemical bonds siyang present, no? Okay? So, it can be used in UV-Vis, okay? In UV-Vis, we can quantify the matter based on how much UV light is absorbed. And then In IR spectroscopy naman, the matter absorbs infrared radiation so that it will vibrate. No? So sa UVB's quantification, so nagme-measure tayo ng amount of matter. But in the IR, we just determine the types of chemical bonds na based on the vibrations they do. Okay? So, yan. Okay? So, ganun lang yung ganap niya. So, again, emission and fluorescence, same idea lang. Matter will absorb energy and they will release it no, in distinct wavelengths. But when it comes to absorption, dalawa uri niyan. UV-Vis absorption, your matter will absorb certain amount of light, and using that information, we can quantify them. We can identify their concentrations. Okay? So, yun yung ginagawa sa UV-Vis. Sometimes light can be also absorbed so that it will vibrate at different modes. No? And depending on the vibration, we can identify the chemical bonds present. Okay? So, yun lang. Okay? So, yun yung summary ng mga slides na to. Okay? Kasi parang paulit-ulit lang yung sinasabi dito. No? Okay? So, summarize natin dito sa emission and fluorescence. Parehas lang yung idea niyan. No? So, light, i-absorb ng matter natin, and then later on, they will be irradiated. No? So, mag-glow siya. So, that is true for emission and emission and fluorescence. But for the absorption, okay, for the absorption, iba naman. No? So, yung light natin, i-absorb yan ng matter. Okay? So, i-absorb niya lang. Okay? And depending on how much matter is absorbed, we can identify the concentrations or the type of chemical bonds present in your matter. Okay? So, it can give us two information. Okay? Concentration or chemical bonds. Na? Kapag concentration yung gusto mo malaman, you can use UV-Vis. Okay? Kapag chemical bonds naman, you can use IR. Okay? So IR spectroscopy. So ganun lang. So ito yung pinaka-summary ng mga slides na yun. Okay? So emission, absorb energy, then release as radiation. So kumbaga mag-glow. In absorption, iba naman, it will just absorb the light, and then depending on how much is absorbed, you can identify the concentration or the chemical bonds. No? Okay? So, yan. Saan ginagamit yung spectroscopy? So, it has a lot of applications. For example, in research, even in biology, ginagamit siya. Okay? Suppose you want to quantify the amount of proteins in your sample, no? We can use spectroscopy, no? In identifying the proteins in our sample. Not only proteins, even DNA, no? Can be quantified using spectrophotometry. Okay? Meron tinatawag na A420, 400 ata, no? Okay. So, yan, we can quantify the amount of DNA using UV-Vis. Na? Okay? So, yan. So, pwede natin malaman whether that's proteins, depending on the absorbance, na? Kung siya ay nucleic acid ba, or something else. Na? Okay? So, depending on the wavelengths you obtain, na? They absorb. Okay? So, yan. Sa biochem, magagamit niya to. Okay? So, yan. And then, saan pa siya ginagamit? Not only in life sciences, but also in chemistry, of course. Ginagamit namin to in quantifying amount of matter. No? So, kunwari, you see a very dark object, meaning maraming chemicals na nandun. But if you see a faint object, Sabihin, onti lang yung chemicals na nandun. Okay? So, yan. Okay? So, saan pa ginagamit yung spectroscopy? In space research then. No? So, they look at the emission spectra of different celestial objects. And depending on the spectra of that celestial object, they can identify the elements. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, it's not only applicable here on Earth, but also in outer space na. Okay? So, basta ang idea lang is that the light emitted by certain objects can give us an idea on the elements present in the sample. Okay? And then, we can also use the light absorbed by the sample to quantify or to identify what compounds are present in it. No? For example, in DNA nga, pwede mo malaman kung protein ba yan or nucleic acids. Ayan. So, depende sa kanyang absorption spectra. And in your biochem, gagawin nyo to. Okay? So, yeah. So, face-to-face na naman yung biochem nyo. So, babalikan nyo ulit itong idea na to. Okay? So, yun lang. Just keep in mind that yung mga chemical bonds in our biomolecules, they can absorb energy. And then, depending on kung ano yung na-absorb nila, so, iba-iba yung wavelength na yan. Okay? We can classify them based on that. Okay? So, yun lang. So, actually, tapos na tayo. So, yun lang naman kasi yung idea na ito. No? So, siguro might be thinking, ano po yung laman ng quiz natin dito? So, ang laman ng quiz natin dito will be this idea, the classification of EMR, the trends in the EMR, ito yon. Okay, you have to memorize the trends, of course. The difference between the ionizing and the non-ionizing radiation, of course. And then the history, no? So, sino yung nagsabi na light as waves? Sino naman yung nagsabi light as particles, no? So, si Maxwell and Isaac Newton, they believe that light is a form of waves and they can be separated using a prism. Yung light as particle naman, so si Planck yung nagpauso nun, wherein he said that light comes in packets, no? And that packets are called photons. No? Yung photons na yon, it can hit the matter. Pwede siya tumama sa matter. So, light as matter. Si Einstein, napatunayan niya yon using the photoelectric effect. Okay? So, in photoelectric effect, nung tumama yung ating light sa bakal, natanggal yung electron. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, light behaves as a matter. And then, yung kabaliktaran naman nun, matter that can act as light. Si Niels Bohr naman yung may gawa nun. Okay? So, according to Niels Bohr, yung ating matter, when you just give it enough energy, it will release light. No? So, dun sila nagtalo, nanalo si Niels Bohr. So, the idea of Niels Bohr na yung matter, kapag nilagyan mo ng energy, it will release light. It resulted into spectroscopy, such as emission spectroscopy, absorption spectroscopy, and then the fluorescence spectroscopy. Okay? So, yun yung mga produkto ng idea ni Niels Bohr. Okay? So, again, yung summary lang ng tatlong yan. So, in emission or in fluorescence spectroscopy, your light is being absorbed by the matter and then later on, it is released again in the form of light. Yung light ina-absorb din, yung light nire-release din. When it comes to absorption, iba naman. I-absorb lang ng matter mo yung light. Okay? And then depending on the type of light you use, for example, UV-vis ba yan or IR, you can either tell the concentration or the chemical bonds present. Okay? So, yan. So, ito ay ginagamit in quantification of proteins, quantification of different substances dissolved in your sample. Okay? So, di ba gumawa kayo ng flow charting as our first problem set? So, yan. Nakita nyo doon that some methods uses UV vis, no? In order to determine the concentration of the analyte in the sample. So yan. Yun yung absorption using UV vis. Ito namang absorption using IR, it gives us an idea on the chemical bonds. No? Okay. So let me show you the IR spectra lang. Okay. So this is how the IR spectra looks like. It's different for every compound, no? And each peak there corresponds to certain chemical bonds. No? For example, we have here the carbon-hydrogen bond. This is the overtones for aromatic ring. Yan. And as chemist, kailangan kabisado namin to. So yeah, till now, kabisado ko pa naman. Okay. For example, this is the sp3 hybridization, sp3 hybridized carbon-hydrogen bond. Ayan. So these are the aromatics here. This is the carbon-oxygen bond somewhere here, no? So yan. So yan. So hindi siya nakakatulong sa quantification, but in identifying chemical bonds, pwede. Okay? So yan. For example, this is OH bond. This is alkane. Ayan. Okay? Ayan. This is carboxylic. Ganyan yung mga carboxylic eh. This is the carbonyl bond. Ayan. Okay? So, ayan. Hindi naman lahat yan ina-identify namin. So, yung mga prominent lang. Kasi baka isipin nyo yung kinakabisado namin yun. Lahat ng yan. Yung mga malalaking peak lang. Okay? So, ayan. And from that, we can identify the chemical bonds. No? I also forgot to include that we have other type of spectroscopy such as the proton NMR. Okay, so the proton NMR is another type of spectroscopy wherein instead of just looking at the chemical bonds, you actually see the position of the atoms in a molecule. Okay, sa IR kasi chemical bonds lang, pero pagdating sa NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, makikita mo talaga yung connection nila. Okay? When I say makikita mo, ganito yon, naka-graph siya. And those graphs can be interpreted na. Okay? And as chemists, kailangan namin kabisaduhin yan. Okay? So yan. So yan. For each type of chemical peaks there, may corresponding position siya sa molecule. So yan. Anyway, I will not teach you those things naman. Okay? Because to be honest with you, isang buong subject yan, no? Pag BS Chem ka, that's the third ANA-Chem. So in the third ANA-Chem, doon ka mag-identify ng chemical bonds, identify ng position of the atoms. So it's a whole different subject. No? So I'm just giving you the idea. No? Okay. Yan. But anyway, all those things make use of light. No? So that's why they are called spectroscopy. Okay. We can study the behavior of matter based on how they interact with the light. Okay. So yan. So yan na. So that's it na. So expect na yung quiz dito is more on identification. More on identification lang talaga siya. Okay. Difference between emission, absorption, and then fluorescence. Okay. And then types of EMR lang. So kumbaga onti lang yung talaga yung mga onti lang yung lalabas sa quiz dito. Okay? So yun lang. So that's it na. So that's chapter 7. Yun na yan. Okay? So meaning we're done with chapter 7. Chapter 8 na lang, which will be uploaded this Wednesday. Okay? So we're done with chapter 7 na. Okay? So any question or interesting ideas? No? Siguro bigyan ko na rin kayo ng context na sa magiging lab. No? Kasi not all of you are under my class na. In the lab, you will make use of absorption spectroscopy. Okay? So again, in the absorption spectroscopy, your matter will absorb light. Okay, so i-absorb niya yung light, and depending on how much light is absorbed, it is related to the concentration. Okay, so yan. Pakita ko lang yung laboratory experiment done. Okay, so dito gagawa kayo ng spectrometer. Okay, and then you will use that spectrometer in determining the concentration. Okay, so yan. So gagawa kayo ng solutions, and then depending on the concentration of the solution, they will have different intensities. No? So for example, ito 0% concentration yan. Dito 100% concentration. Even though the difference is minute, when you check it using this spectrometer that we will make using cell phone, makikita nyo na nagbabago talaga yung absorbance depending on the concentration. Okay, and you can graph it and you will see that it is linear. Okay, so makikita nyo that the absorption is directly related to the concentration. So the higher the concentration, the higher the absorbed light. Okay, so mas marami siya na absorb na light. Okay, so yun lang. So again, expect that the quiz for chapter 7 is very easy. Memorization lang siya, as in. So yun, kumbaga parang pamigay na to halos. Okay, yun. Any question or any ideas that you want to share, or okay na naman? Ganun lang ka-short yung discussion natin dito. Okay. So I guess kung wala na, so that's it, no? So yun lang. So that's it for today. Sa lab, i-discuss na maigi doon yung UV-Vis kasi may experiment kayo doon. So kailangan i-discuss talaga na maigi yung UV-Vis na. So doon mas maraming calculation, mas maraming memorization. Okay. But in the lecture, ito lang yan, no? As is lang siya. Okay. So just memorize the key persons and their contribution. The spectrum, of course, their differences, okay, and then the overall idea about emission, absorption, and fluorescence, okay? Kasi nag-overlap yung definitions nila. So, yung key idea lang, yung sinulat ko somewhere here, okay? Yan. So, di ba sabi ko sa inyo, madali lang. Madali na lang yung yung last part ng Anachem. Okay? So, it's super easy. Kailan ko i-open yung quiz dito? Most probably next week, no? Together with the quiz for chapter 8, no? Yung chapter 8 kasi another easy topic na naman yon, more on memorization lang. And next week ko na lang din i-post yung quiz, no? And then kayo na bahala kung kailan nyo ito-take siya. Okay? But yan, we're almost at the end of Anachem. Also, this will be our last synchronous session. No? So yan, kasi next week is asynchronous na tayo and election day. Okay? So yan, so that's our lesson for today. Okay?